those who only give on to their family instead of state, and those who also alienate people in the group. And they show an quote-unquote unmortified spirit, and so should be prohibited and starved from social interaction, harass them away, and spread all of their misdeeds onto the public, and good deeds to be met with doubtful expressions. This is almost like the Staatsi's Zersetzung. It's getting close, where upon opposing the political order, they will send people to go and harass and, as Zersetzung is translated, decompose someone, basically. This is character assassination. This is one of the earliest accounts of real, almost group or gang stalking to enable a doctrine to give wealth and property to society rather than relatives. So this was a culturally engineered thing in where this cult of people would go after a person that did something against the group. Maybe they made gesture to say, oh, well, I'm thinking about going to another church, and led someone away, drew money away from the group, or obviously it was financially incentivized, but the unmortified spirit, I speculate, had many other impressions in groups like this that enabled types of harassment, and this is probably how it spawned and why there are a lot of Eugenbuller's patients under the diagnosis of something like paranoid schizophrenia, where they were really being victimized by Jesuits, and people didn't know at the time, and as they're trying to classify this illness, they unintentionally gaslit real victims of such a horrific thing that caused genuine illness, which in my opinion could just be called shell shock or PTSD. But due to how covert it is, they can get away with anything. Now, the schizophrenia sometimes will go into saying that they're being harassed by witchcraft or electrical devices later on, and the idea manifests into the being that this is happening, where you have confirmation bias, things keep going wrong, gets worse and worse and worse, and you start confirming that maybe it's witchcraft. Maybe someone has some sort of electromagnetic device that makes me feel this way. Like how you could tell a child about ghost stories and put them in a dark room, their subconscious begins to confirm that it's happening over and over again until they start to manifest threat detection for those things around them when nothing really is happening at all, just in the darkness. If a Freemason sent a buddy around to talk about witchcraft and also gave them the flu unintentionally, and all of a sudden they got all these rashes over their face, and they've just been introduced to the idea of witchcraft, and all these bad things were happening, all of a sudden you can start believing that it really is witchcraft through the constant confirmation, and that they're controlling everyone because they're referencing things about your life or whatever it is, as was done to me as a child. This type of group harassment does exist, and it's very horrible, and the psychology has been gatekept for thousands of years, if you can believe it. And people were on the verge of understanding through the age of information, but in the 70s things changed. Firstly, in the 30s, the Polish Master Mason, their whole lodge was detailing schizophrenia at the time, and they made their own diagnosis. But up to the 60s, The West had their own idea of what this was, and they recognized the lateral and vertical thinking. And it wouldn't be much time before they'd realize that groups were doing this. But in the 70s, things changed, where all of a sudden 2 psychologists began changing modern mental health to accept the Mason's diagnosis of schizophrenia, which overlooks a lot of the things that could potentially condition the illness to begin with. We no longer do schizophrenia and autism exist on the same spectrum. This can further into more conspiracies about how this is used to sell people medication. But I would like to delve into a very bigger picture, the grand narrative, similar to the Great Reset. Now I'll be reading from my notes. Harold Pratt House was a building established as the Council on Foreign Relations, CFR, in 1921. It was a non-profit think tank founded by a group of prominent American leaders. Woodrow Wilson was one of these, along with many American Anglo-Saxons, bankers, and high-up politicians. The aim of this group was to study and guide foreign policy, some seeing it like a proto-League of Nations. There is a popular conspiracy that the British intelligence had some influence on the formation of the CFR. Britain had many roundtable groups, the main one the Royal Institute of International Affairs, or the RIIA, inspired by a network of British elites who were discussing and promoting internationalism, British foreign policy, and global governance framework. Members of these groups, such as Cecil Rhodes and Alfred Milner, had envisioned a world in which Britain played a central role in international governance. Several of the early figures involved in the creation of the CFR, including John Foster Dulles and Paul Warburg, had direct or indirect ties to British internationalist circles. They were influenced by the ideas and sought to create a similar organization in the United States, drawing inspiration from the RIIA's model. The RIIA also set up similar chapters in India, among other nations like Africa, Latin America, Middle East, and all across Europe. From the CFR, we had many major groups spawn, including the World Economic Forum, Davos, Bilderberg, and the UN. All of these groups and chapters are involved in guiding international affairs and steering countries in desired directions. I believe also even the CIA had the CFR with hands in its creation, which also has deep ties to Britain itself. Many of the directors were members of the CFR. These groups and chapters recruit thousands of the best in any field, and from what it seems to me, learning from many whistleblowers we face today, we are dealing with the threat of transfer of national power, where employees in specific government and non-government bodies can move up ranks if they say yes to, enabling transfer of national power to unelected multinational corporations and government. And those groups play out in governing global politics, slowly taking away your democracy. Sometimes held up in corruption, using blackmail to keep it quiet, or sometimes just ignorance of employees who do not care. Enabling the power transfer, these groups all have hands in globalism and steering all countries in their desired direction, creating the path for a corporate takeover. I believe the intelligence agencies are all involved in it. Firstly, let's take a look at the involvement of human trafficking, pedophile rings and blackmail, You have Epstein. There is a powerful web of control set up in New York. Firstly, 9 East 71 Street is a center web of international operations to blackmail scientists, celebrities, and politicians. This is the home address of Jeffrey Epstein, a 7-story sex dungeon palace having influence on many different nations in the world. It should be recognized, Ghislaine Maxwell, Epstein's close associate, had been a focal point in many of these theories. Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, was a media mogul with significant ties to British intelligence. Robert Maxwell was known to have been an agent for British MI6 intelligence service. Though the details of this involvement remain murky and contested, some conspiracy theories suggest that Ghislaine Maxwell may have inherited a network of intelligence connections, potentially implicating Epstein in espionage activities linked to both British intelligence and Mossad. Robert Maxwell's mysterious death in 1991 also adds fuel to speculation. His body was found in the Atlantic Ocean, and it was widely suggested that he had been involved in espionage, potentially for both the Soviet Union and the West. Some believe that his ties in the MI6 and Mossad could have extended to his daughter Ghislaine, and by extension Epstein. It is also noticed Epstein had quite a few photos circulating around where he is spending time with high-ranking Israeli officials, only fueling suspicions further. Epstein is involved in being used to compromise anyone, right up to the British aristocracy. Prince Andrew was famously filmed entering this building, going in and out alongside young women. This is business of pedophile rings, hidden behind closed doors. Harold Pratt House is one of the buildings used just for this, New York Circle, in Park Avenue, East 68th Street. Another, the United Nations, founded in 1946, built on land donated by the Rockefeller family and foundation. Here we find a web in New York consisting of Epstein's 7-story sex palace, the CFR and the UN all standing together, and it seems the aims of these groups have deep intentions to not only govern international affairs but engage in a corporate takeover, controlling people through blackmail, stalking people and abusing anti-terrorism laws, developing something called spectrum dominance. Jeffrey Epstein is just one of the many that compromise leading scientists and academics with underage girls. So they go along with the agenda, where money can no longer account to bribe them. This is a project set up by the British Empire, a project of Cecil Rhodes, a project of the Council of Foreign Relations, and everything that comes out of that. The Bilderberg Group is a club for the world's elite and major spies, where they go discuss major decisions in the world, meeting behind closed doors, where when a person may want to enter a high position of government or influence, they will want to know if you follow along with the global politics or not, having the potential then to finance silencing you. Many belong to the intelligence world, Harold Pratt and the World Economic Forum, Club of Rome, or the UN. They all promote the same agenda, and I believe this is a criminal organization, or crime Gestapo, that is aiming to establish a corporate takeover. A more recent story, Bishop Mari Emanuel, who was brutally stabbed on a live feed not soon after speaking out on how 40,000 children in Australia disappear every year. Some of the names associated with the abuse of these children are ex-prime ministers of the nation. I see here it's not limited to the UK and the USA, but it's international. Global webs of pedophilia and human trafficking are fueling